One of the main reasons that long-term relationships come to an end is just that people grow apart. But what does this mean exactly? And is it fixable, or is it better to just move on and start over with somebody new? Well, the truth is that growing apart isn't usually what you think, and in most situations, you can reconnect with your ex even if you feel that you've grown apart. And in this video, I'll explain how. I'm Brad Browning, author of The X Factor, and when I became a breakup coach almost 15 years ago now, I knew that I'd face some tough situations with breakups that really felt impossible to solve. But growing apart was something that I honestly didn't really consider. I assumed at first that it was really a dead end, that if you and your partner grew apart, there was basically nothing that could be done about it. But then I met Lawrence. Now, Lawrence reached out to me over 10 years ago now, and he was heartbroken. He thought that everything was fine in his relationship with his partner, Kara, and then one day Kara came home from her band practice and told him it was over. She felt like they were growing apart and there was nothing that they could do to fix it. And a week later, she'd moved out and he was left with an empty apartment and an empty heart. And honestly, that's how quickly it can happen. Now, this is something that people often don't talk about because they just don't know how. It seems like the problem just gets worse and worse over time, and then one day it's too late and you just look at that other person and you can't relate to who they've become. That is essentially what it means to grow apart. Lawrence met Kara when they were still in high school. They were both on the track team and they started talking on the bus one day on the way to one of their track meets. And a month later, they were inseparable. And they never left each other's sides in the 15 years since. They enrolled in the same college right out of high school and they moved in together. After graduation, Kara got a job as a music teacher and Lawrence got an entry-level position at an accounting firm. They were really happy to be working in their fields and coming home to one another every night. But then time passed. Lawrence rose to a prominent position in his firm and he was working long hours. Around tax season, they wouldn't see each other for days on end. And meanwhile, Kara was working as a music teacher at a local high school and she started a band. And they spent less and less time together. And when they did, they found that they had trouble talking about their lives. They didn't understand each other's problems or even their successes. They tried to be supportive, but they were really just losing their ability to connect. After a couple years of drifting apart, that's when Kara decided to just end it and leave Lawrence behind. Now, this was heartbreaking to hear, but the more that I talked to Lawrence, the more that I started to understand what it meant to grow apart and how this could be remedied with the right course of action. So let me share with you the solution that I found. But in order to understand, first you need to really understand what actually went wrong. Many people treat growing apart like it's some unstoppable process that happens completely organically and is sad, but ultimately necessary if you're going to be able to grow as a person and find your true self. Now, I think that while this makes sense on paper, it's actually the wrong way of looking at it. I think that you can create a relationship where you have room to change quite drastically and still retain that connection. In fact, this kind of growth can actually make your relationship even stronger. And that means, growing apart doesn't mean the end of your relationship. If you are willing to work through it, you can often find happiness together again. Now, of course, there are scenarios where growing as a person takes you so far away from your partner that, it's not even really worth trying to overcome. And I will cover those later on in the video, but I will also say that those situations are rare. And I've probably said it 50 times already in this video, but let's ask now, what actually is growing apart? While I think we all know in general what we're talking about, it's important to be specific, because this is quite a subtle process at times. And because I know that a few of you are like poor Lawrence, blindsided that this happened at all, and really not knowing what it means or what to do about it. I think the biggest sign of growing apart is the feeling that you can't relate to this person anymore. Once you two were really on the same page about just about everything. It was like you shared a brain, you'd set up a joke and they'd say the punchline, you'd ask them what they wanted for dinner and they'd say the exact same thing you were thinking of. And obviously, this is a great feeling. But I will also say, this can be quite an immature feeling, and it's one that you often experience, most often in relationships between young people who really haven't figured themselves out yet. In fact, the younger you are, really the more you'll have in common with the average person. It's normal for people to become more distinct as we grow older and have certain life experiences that push us in a different direction or a specific direction. But I think the mistake that we make is wanting our romantic partners to be exactly like us. We think that we need to think and feel the exact same way as they do to have some kind of connection. So we look for somebody who is as similar to us as possible and then find that connection suffers as we grow and change over time. But let's get even more specific here. One of the reasons we grow apart is that aspects of us change. We develop different values and interests than the other person. And this is actually one of those situations that can be the hardest to overcome. So if you want to live a frugal lifestyle and retire early, and your partner needs to have a new car and a 5-star vacation every year, then the two of you are going to struggle to create a life together. If you want to travel the world and they want to stay in their hometown to be close to their family, then you may be too different to actually make things work. But typically, it's not this extreme. Usually it's more like one person is a little more adventurous and the other is a little more closed off. One loves skiing while the other just wants to stay in and watch movies. Things like that. And another reason we may grow apart over time is if we fail to create a life together. So say you've been dating for 5 years and you still don't live together, spend time with one another's families, or really travel together. In that situation, really it's no wonder that the two of you aren't connecting like you used to. Your relationship has essentially stalled out at some point, and it's making it impossible to really connect. Connection comes from sharing experiences, both good and bad. So if you don't care for one another when you get sick or injured, if you don't get stuck in the airport, together for hours, and if you never do an escape room, they're not really making these memories that are so important if you want to build a real connection. Essentially, life is going to come along and try to push you and your partner apart if you let it. So you need to be doing things to counteract that. This doesn't always have to be a deliberate process, but if your relationship is suffering, then you do want to get on top of it and fast. Now, believe it or not, spending all of your time together and talking every second of the day isn't necessarily the answer here. Because I've found that many couples who were severely codependent in this way were actually the ones who ended up growing apart. And that is because of a process called habituation. Basically, if you're together too much, then you can start to take each other for granted. Your partner starts to blend in with the wallpaper and you no longer see where they end and you begin. And in these situations, you get used to your roles in the relationship, that you get so used to them that you start to feel like you really can't grow or change. And ironically, the resentment that builds starts to push you apart. And resentment is another big factor here. Resentment towards a partner can often build slowly. At first you think, hey, they didn't take out the garbage. It would be nice, but it's not a big deal. But when it's the 20th time you open the cabinet and you see that trash can is overflowing, you're filled with anger towards the other person. And if you fail to address it, resentment will just build up and it'll drive a wedge between you. Because that resentment becomes something like a secret. It's this big bad thing in the middle of the relationship that you're not talking about. And the more parts of your life that you feel you have to keep from your partner, the less you'll be on the same page and the more you'll feel like you're growing apart. Now, I know this is a lot of information, and how does any of it help? How can you address these issues now that you've broken up? There are tangible steps that you can take here to bridge the gap and reconnect with your ex. So it starts with number 1, which is create more space. Yes, I know that you want to come together, but first you really need to create a little more space between yourself and your ex, or capitalize on the space that's already there. So if you and your ex are already not speaking, then while I know it doesn't feel like it, you're actually in a good place. Because cutting those ties can be messy, and you need this more complete separation if you are going to heal and come back together. You need to spend at least a few weeks, or longer depending on the length of your relationship, cut off from your ex as much as possible. So that means no hanging out, no phone calls, texting, social media interactions, really nothing. Only interact with your ex if it's essential, because not doing so, not responding to them, will cause them to become upset. Now, this is probably going to feel impossible, but that's what makes it so necessary. As with many relationship issues, the space that you get from a breakup can be a huge source of healing for both of you. If codependency was your issue, then being apart for a few weeks can be enough to show you both what went wrong and how to fix it. And space also helps you see what was working in the relationship. Because growing apart doesn't mean that every aspect of the relationship wasn't working. Often growing apart means issues in just a few areas of the relationship. And these issues are clearly very important and shouldn't just be swept under the rug, but with a little bit of perspective, you'll see that they're not the insurmountable problems that you thought. And beyond that, this space will make your ex miss you like really nothing else. It really is a total game changer for any breakup, but especially in this kind of specific situation. But all that said, time and space alone is probably not going to be enough here. So what's next? Well, number 2, accept that you've grown apart. More than anything, you need to accept the fact that the two of you did grow apart. Now, I see so many people fail to win back their ex because they're caught up in arguing with them. They say, we didn't grow apart. Things are perfect. You're hiding something. Are you cheating on me? And this kind of denial just leads to giant blowout fights because it shows your ex that you're not willing to see what they're seeing. And is there any better evidence of you two growing apart than you refusing to even admit that there's a problem? You can't be further apart than that, right? So face the music and accept that you two have grown apart and that your connection has suffered as a result. This doesn't mean, admitting defeat. It means recognizing you're at a crossroads. I've worked with a lot of clients facing this exact situation over the years, and most of them tend to find the one-on-one guidance and support really helpful. So if you want to tell me about your situation in detail and have me help you and guide you along the way as things unfold, please consider signing up for my very affordable personal coaching program. You can see my availability and all the details at breakupbrad.com/coaching. And once you've signed up, we'll begin working on a plan starting today. Now, let's move on. And at this point, I'm going to give you a reason to hold on to hope. And it's this. Very different people can be happy in a relationship together. I think this is something that, we lose sight of when we talk about growing apart. In fact, after a breakup of a long-term relationship, what happens? Well, most often the person that you date next is going to be very different from your ex, and also from you. And you'll be shocked how happy you can be with someone you have so little in common with. It happens all the time. So think about your ex. You were once very similar people. Are they really that different now? Or is it just that your connection suffered and you didn't really know how to fix it? And number 3, don't act like your ex. Now, this might sound a bit strange, but I do think that it's something that many people naturally do when they've been told that they're growing apart. And that is, they try to bridge the gap by acting more like their ex. So that means, getting into the same hobbies as them, adopting their attitudes, and agreeing with them about everything. That's always going to feel weird and unnatural, right? It won't be sustainable, and it just won't work for anybody. It's just going to feel like you're kissing their ass, and it's not going to be attractive. So essentially, you need to stop chasing after them, hoping that they'll see you're not so different. Because you both have changed, and you're not going to be able to convince them otherwise, especially now that you've broken up. And that brings us to number 4, which is to create a new dynamic. So instead of acting more like your ex, really act more like yourself. That's really the key here. You need to create a new dynamic between the two of you. Honestly, that's where this breakup can actually really work to your advantage, because it forces you to rebuild your connection from the ground up. But this only works if you're willing to look inside and see who you really are. Now, this doesn't have to be some big journey of self-discovery or anything like that. It's more about looking for the way communication broke down between the two of you. And I'm betting you'll find the biggest reason is that you weren't acknowledging all the changes that you've actually both gone through. You were trying to talk to each other the way you had all along, and you were finding that you weren't connecting in the same way. So it's time to throw out the script. When you're talking to your ex next, try to share a more honest version of yourself. You're not going to transform completely. You still want them to see that you're that person they were so in love with, but it's about showing them that you have depth that they really didn't know about. And number 5 is take an interest in your ex. So beyond being more authentic yourself, you also need to take a deeper look at your ex. Because part of the reason for the breakup is that you weren't seeing them clearly. You were seeing the version of them that you thought you knew. And you were seeing all the ways that they failed to live up to that. But now it's time for you to look at how they've grown and actually matured over time. Look for those changes and take an interest in them. Now, conversations can be tricky while you're trying to reconnect with your ex, but this can honestly really help. So instead of the same boring conversations you usually have with them, ask deeper, more meaningful conversations and questions about their new interests. And point out and compliment, how they've changed over time. Don't shy away from it. Now, remember Lawrence and Kara that we talked about at the beginning? Well, one of their issues was that they were entering different worlds. Kara was a musician and Lawrence was really focused on his career as an accountant. And they found that they struggled to have conversations about their passions with one another. And Lawrence found this especially difficult while trying to reconnect with Kara. Instead of getting frustrated and upset when this happens, I told Lawrence to look at it as an opportunity to learn more about her all over again. You want to teach each other about your passions as a way to connect. So even if, accounting is boring to you, as it probably is to almost everyone except Lawrence, understand that you're not really learning about accounting as much as you're learning about this person, what they care about, and what their priorities and their struggles are. It's really about finding common ground. Think about it like, early dating. Remember when you were, just trying to understand this other person, figuring out their quirks and what makes them who they are? Well, this is an opportunity to do it all over again. So come together slowly and find out where you fit in each other's lives. And number 6 is let go of the past. I think one of the biggest issues in this process is clinging to the past. We want this person to just become who they used to be so that we can relate to them. But you need to accept that that version of them is gone. They're in the past. And you're missing out on the version of them that's standing right in front of you. So show interest in who they are now rather than who they used to be. But that being said, don't get too wrapped up in this. I know you may be tempted to dive in and try to get close to them by, joining their band or reading the same books that they do or talking about their new passion every minute of every day. And this kind of impulse obviously comes from a good place, but it's ultimately misguided. Because remember, you can't recreate the connection by just becoming exactly like them. You're only going to freak them out and put pressure on them, and that's going to end up scaring them away. So come back together slowly. Show them that you can still connect with them, not despite all of the changes, but because of them. And that's what happened for Lawrence and Kara in the end. They took some time apart. They recognized that they'd both changed. At first, Kara was reluctant to try again, but Lawrence really didn't want to give up so easily. He slowly rebuilt the connection, essentially doing all of the things that we've covered so far in this video. And I am happy to say that they've been married for some time now. Now, I know you may think that, they just got lucky. And of course, it doesn't always work out so perfectly. But the truth is that if Lawrence hadn't made an honest effort, they wouldn't be together today. Chances are you can find a similar happy ending to your story, assuming you do follow the advice that I've laid out in this video and you really put in the time and the effort. I'll definitely be rooting for you. And that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.